You're absolutely right that this is a huge challenge for enterprises using AI. How you choose to use it, which model you use, how you train that model, what guardrails you build in, how you then do your testing and ongoing monitoring after it's deployed. And I don't think it's anti-AI to talk about the limitations and risks of AI, because actually what I think it does is it's a key part of AI literacy. It helps people figure out where does it actually make sense to use it in a way that's valuable. AI in itself, I don't think it's inherently good or bad. It has amazing opportunities for humanity. The more AI becomes embedded in everything and part of everything, the greater premium will be placed on human authenticity and stuff that is really real. Because what's really interesting is AI governance has become a professional discipline in itself, in the same way that accounting or law or banking are professional disciplines.
This week on GAEA Talks, Oliver Patel, all the way from Barcelona. Good to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to our discussion today.
So, give us a little background, because you have a prestigious background, a very, I think, useful background for the audience. And we discussed before, our audience, according to the metrics, is AI researchers, business leaders, and that's a really important part of this one, and venture capitalists. So, from the business leader perspective, your insights are going to be extremely valuable.
Well, so I've spent my whole career working on the ethics and governance and policy implications of technology, mainly focused on AI and data. And really, my journey has been from theory to policy to practice. So I kind of trace this all back to my postgraduate studies in philosophy and public policy at LSE. So all those years ago when I was studying my master's, that's when I was first exposed to topics about AI ethics. And actually, it was through studying philosophy of mind that I was exposed to this whole debate around what is human intelligence, what is human consciousness, and could it potentially be replicated, simulated, and maybe even surpassed in non-human form. And it was through those studies that I found this field of AI ethics and responsible AI, which was a relatively sort of nascent field, more of a research activity at that point than something that was really beyond the academic and research world. I then spent several years working at University College London in kind of policy research, looking at data, looking at AI. Then I joined the UK government. So I worked on international data policy for the UK government during the kind of transition out of the EU and helping the government navigate that and come to agreements with the EU on matters relating to data sharing. And then about 3.5 years ago, the relatively esoteric interest that I had from my master's in AI ethics and AI governance suddenly was starting to pop up as a career that you could go for in the corporate world. And these jobs actually started to appear. And that's how I ended up working at AstraZeneca, where I am now. So my current role is I'm head of enterprise AI governance. And what that means is I've been sort of leading AstraZeneca's company-wide approach to AI governance and risk management for the past few years. And I've been involved in a lot of activities outside of AstraZeneca, essentially helping to shape the profession of AI governance through training, through education, and through working with many others in this field. Because what's really interesting is AI governance has become a professional discipline in itself, in the same way that accounting or law or banking are professional disciplines. AI governance is becoming a professional discipline. And I've been, I guess, fortunate and privileged to be involved from quite an early stage and really shaping that field, both from within my company and in the broader industry.
So that opens a line of thought, which I think the audience would appreciate, which is effectively, what is AI? Now, that's a very broad term, and we discussed before, and many of our guests have discussed the term AI. And for the business leaders, the executives having to make decisions, we're quite aware that busy people that have a lot of responsibilities and need to get things done did before this AI wave and do still. There's no real place that they would have had the time or the opportunity or potentially access to the sheer level of detail and understanding of what sits under that umbrella of
Hmm.
AI. I think as we discussed before,
Hmm.
the idea of using a spoon to open a can or a can opener to have a bowl of soup
Hmm.
is somewhat farcical, but both have great utility. How would you define the utility that is on offer
Hmm.
across AI to give it more color and depth?
It's obviously a really big and fascinating question, and there isn't just one answer to that question, because what is AI? You can look at it from a philosophical perspective, a legal perspective, and a technical perspective. So I guess I'll cover a bit on each. So the discipline of AI, what we can trace it back to the 1950s. There was a conference at Dartmouth in the US where an interdisciplinary group of researchers and academics came together for the first time and basically agreed and signed up to a almost like a mission statement that they believe that human intelligence could be so precisely understood and described that it could potentially be simulated in non-human form. So really in the 1950s, these scholars came together to agree that it was worthwhile pursuing research in that area to see whether it would one day be possible to um, get to a place where what we know humans can do, our understanding of that would be so sophisticated that we could figure out how to simulate that. So if we think about the definition of AI from a philosophical perspective, I think that that's a useful starting point. It's really about the kind of simulation and replication of human intelligence, and then of course, can we actually go much further than what humans can do, our cognitive ability. So your view on AI will, to a large extent, depend on your views about humanity. Do you believe that there is something special and maybe even sacred about humans, which is such that actually we will never be able to have any type of sort of meaningful intelligence or even consciousness in a non-human form because humans are special, there's nothing like humans in the universe that we're yet aware of? Or do you believe that actually the processes which give rise to intelligence are such that there's nothing inherently special or innate about humans that means that you couldn't achieve that through other means? So you can think of AI in that sense philosophically. You can also think of AI as therefore an outcome rather than an actual technology. So it's almost like if the goal of those scholars back in I think it was in 1956 was to see if we could get to a place where we can understand intelligence to such an extent that we could simulate it, then AI in that sense is more of an outcome or an end that we're trying to achieve collectively rather than a technology. The technology then becomes what are the techniques we use to achieve that outcome of replicating and ultimately surpassing human intelligence and human cognitive abilities in non-human form. It just so happens to be that the techniques of machine learning and then deep learning and obviously generative AI, which is so dominant in the discourse and in AI adoption today, it just so happens to be that those techniques have been the most successful in getting us to a place where today AI can simulate human intelligence. And we obviously, if we go back even further with Alan Turing and the famous Turing test or the imitation game, AI, of course, now can beat the Turing test. But does that mean that it's really that we've really achieved that goal of surpassing human intelligence? I think most people would say no, even though we've passed Alan Turing's threshold for what could be considered human level intelligence.
Hmm. And it does open up the knowledge gap about risk. And again, it comes back to what type of AI would you use for particular problems? And I'm going to bounce around with some thoughts now, but things which pop into my mind, again, if AI thought like my mind, then it would be completely incomprehensible. But I'm thinking scale is something that it's very powerful at. Obviously, one human could do something very well, but could it do that one thing well concurrently 10,000 times?
Mm,
And there's obvious utility in that case. And if we're comparing against a test, obviously a mechanized system could, if it can perform to the same level as a human with a particular function for a
Mm-hmm.
particular cause and can do so on scale, would be considered better. But from the human side, it's making the choice of what are you trying to achieve?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that spans pretty much everything. I mean, business is there to do something to provide value.
Mm-hmm.
That value
Mm-hmm.
has to have an agreed value from the end buyer,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's uh, creating a cure to a particular disease in order that you can uh, sell that particular cure, whether it's to figure out how to write a track,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
develop an artist to have something unique and special. It's so wide ranging.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Where do you think the risks come in, which the average enterprise
Mm-hmm.
should be asking the right question? The human side of AI.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so from an enterprise perspective, and if we think about how businesses can use and adopt AI, it is, as we've both, I guess, been alluding to, it's really important to understand that AI is an extremely broad discipline, and there are many different techniques and approaches and models within the field of AI. And the approach you use has the approach you opt to use or to go for in a given context has a direct impact on the risk level. So just to give a couple of examples, in the field of AI ethics and responsible AI, we often focus on the use of AI to support or augment or maybe even automate material decision making. So think of consequential decisions about people's lives, such as whether they'll be deemed eligible to receive a welfare payment, or whether they'll be shortlisted for an interview for a role, or even whether they'll get the role, or the use of AI in a criminal justice and law enforcement context, the use of AI to inform a parole decision. So these are examples where AI can and is being used by organizations all over the world. But if we then think about some of the fundamental limitations and risks of AI, such as bias, such as explainability, such as accuracy, actually, these risks are not evenly shared among different types of AI technology. So, for example, some AI models are actually much more explainable than others. It's not true to say that all AI is a black box. The AI that we all use every day is a black box. The complexity of the sort of transformer architecture, the models that power ChatGPT, Gemini, and Claude, these are black boxes in the sense that not even the people who build who design and build and maintain them can truly tell you why a particular input led to a given output. But there are other approaches in the field of AI that allow um, sort of much deeper understanding of why an output was generated and which aspects of the input data actually caused the AI to generate a particular output. So just to make it super simple, it's important for businesses and business leaders to understand that the type of AI they choose to use in a given context is probably the second most important decision after should we use AI in that
Mhm.
context. Because also, just because you can use AI doesn't mean you always should.
So
Yeah.
context is king
Mm-hmm.
in that respect. So if you get the context right, the
Mm-hmm.
rest of the thinking
Mm-hmm.
and the decision making can de-risk the situation
Mm-hmm.
and have a lot more sensibility.
Yeah, the risks of AI stem from how it is used. AI is, in my head, I look at AI neutrally. It can be used for good, it can be used for bad, or it can be used for the banal. If I use AI to write a shopping list, I don't really see it as good or bad. It's banal, it's trivial. So it can be used in an infinite number of different ways. What I really care about from a governance perspective and from a ethical perspective is the impact of that use and how you choose to use it, which model you use, how you train that model, what guardrails you build in, how you then do your testing and ongoing monitoring after it's deployed. All of these things matter much more than the fact that you are using AI. So AI in itself, I don't think it's inherently good or bad. It has amazing opportunities for humanity, and there are obviously really important risks that we have to be aware of. So for the businesses deploying AI, it's just crucial to understand that, as you said, context is king. And if you're going to use AI to support high stakes decision making, where you can have a material impact on someone's life, then you want that to be an explainable model. You want to be able to actually interpret why a particular output was provided by the model, and you may have legal obligations to actually provide an explanation. There are laws, such as the GDPR, our data protection regulation, that's in the EU and that the UK inherited to a certain extent, that actually give individuals the right to not be what they call subject to automated decision making in certain areas. So there are actually essentially restrictions on businesses being able to use AI to fully automate certain high stakes decisions. So again, I look at all of this from a quite neutral perspective with respect to the technology, and think more about how are you using it and what impact could that have, and what steps have you taken to mitigate the potential adverse or negative impacts.
It is something that we've seen in the walk of life that we're in as well,
Hmm.
is the procurement. And if we were to go back a couple of years,
Hmm.
so we've been in and around technology space, shall we say, for around a decade, and watching the difference in the approach to procurement
Mm.
and the level of understanding of these particular factors from a business perspective. If you look at all the particular stakeholders in acquiring, setting up,
Mhm,
implementing,
mhm,
running, and developing out any form of AI adoption, the first part is the procurement.
mhm,
What
mhm,
questions need to be asked? The definition or the understanding of, are you investigating, procuring
mhm,
any form of technology which has those risks?
mhm,
That
mhm,
has to be mapped against what the policy of the company is. But a lot of companies are only beginning to get policies in place now. I mean,
mhm,
very, very large companies, which were probably more technologically focused,
mhm, mhm,
were probably more mature. But then that sits upon a legal framework. And something that we discussed in earlier podcasts was the idea of things like ISO
mhm,
27001.
mhm,
So frameworks which are in place to look at data security, use of data, protection of data. And it did seem for a little while, perhaps even now,
mhm,
that decades worth of knowledge and rationale as a construct of mitigating the risk against cyber attacks,
mhm, mhm.
against, I think there was the whole thing with school results,
Yep,
where,
yeah, yeah.
I mean, there are so many stories. Even if we go back to the post office scandal
Mhm, mhm,
and look at what happened there, the law stipulated that computer information created by a computer could not be considered incorrect.
mhm,
So it had a higher legal precedent, even if the system was creating spurious data. That caused massive
mhm,
problems.
mhm,
And that's a pre-AI
mhm,
time,
mhm,
in the new wave at least. Now we're in a world where people have wanted to move forward quickly on the basis that you've got to be there with AI and figure it out later.
mm,
But often that meant ignoring decades worth of rationale and common sense, throwing it out the window, and just dumping everything into something which was not understood,
mhm, mhm,
not defined. I mean, surely we're gonna have huge repercussions
mm,
as a result of what people come to a realization, if they haven't already, of some of the decisions that were made. And just reversing back to the start of the point, I've seen a number of companies pretty much put in initially a ban on the procurement of AI,
mhm,
not because they didn't see there was benefit,
mhm,
because it was obvious to some there were far too many questions around ethics, governance,
mhm.
and risk.
Yeah. Well, lots of fascinating insights. So I think I really want to pick up, before going deep into the procurement angle. You mentioned the school in the UK, the kind of grading scandal, should we call it, where during COVID, students and pupils were not able to go and all do exams in big exam centers because of the restrictions. And because of that, the government decided to use, I guess, a type of algorithm to assign grades based on, data about the students. And this ended up being quite a big scandal for the government at the time. And I think what was quite interesting about it is it's a really good demonstration of the point that what matters is the type of AI technology that you use, not how sophisticated or advanced is it. Because it doesn't matter whether it's quite a, let's say, straightforward, traditional algorithm or model that maybe is something we've known and had for many years or maybe even many decades, and where it is quite easy to understand and interpret, or the most advanced generative AI model that not even the creators of it understand really how it works. In this instance, it was actually, I think it might not have even met the definition of AI. It might have just been like a really advanced statistical model. But what it demonstrates is that one model with potential biases encoded or with gaps in the data that it's used for training or that's powered it, and with flaws in the way in which it's weighting different factors, was able to assign grades to every student in the country. So people always say, "Oh, why do you always talk about AI bias? Humans are biased." Okay, well, there's no which teacher in the country decides everyone's grade? No teacher or examiner has that power. So one AI model or one algorithm, whatever we want to call it, probably built by a relatively small team of engineers and researchers, can have the impact at that scale in a way that no human could. Okay, maybe you could make a case that a world leader or a politician can have that kind of impact. But in general, most decisions that impact our lives. So I think I just wanted to pick up on it because it's an illustration of the point that AI can operate at such a scale that if there are biases or flaws in how it works, the impact can be much greater than the kind of implicit biases that one individual may have in a given context. On the procurement piece, you're absolutely right that this is a huge challenge for enterprises using AI, because obviously the costs of building and training these most advanced foundation models are prohibitive for most organizations. We're talking about tens, maybe even hundreds of millions of dollars in compute to run what they call training runs. So to feed new data to the model, to build the next version of the model, to improve it. And also, there's not really any need for most companies to do this because the performance has got to a state where they're not, the vast majority of companies will never catch up. And so there's no need for them to pour money into that. So we have a situation now where the whole enterprise world is essentially consuming AI models on demand from a relatively small group of companies. And that has, I guess, given rise to a whole host of new challenges and considerations from a governance perspective that just weren't there before. And for me, what's most interesting about it is the fact that these are general purpose technologies, so they can be used basically in any way by the organization that decides to use it. But how they work or how they don't work potentially is determined by the organization that developed it. But they didn't develop it knowing how it would be used because they can't, because it's general purpose. So it's a really tricky one for laws and sort of legal and liability systems to navigate, because you're essentially putting general purpose technology into the world, and by definition you then don't know, or you can't anticipate how it will be used and what people will do with it. So what the laws in the AI space are trying to figure out, like the EU AI Act, is what should those foundation model developers have to do up front to reduce the likelihood of their general purpose technology being used or misused in ways that could have a negative impact. But then for the enterprises, they need to figure out what information do we need from these foundation model developers in order to use their model safely, and then what extra steps do we have to take to use their model safely. So really everyone has a responsibility in a sense, but there's like an asymmetry, I guess, of information exchange between the foundation model developers and the rest of the economy that uses those models. But then, of course, from an AI governance perspective, a large chunk of our time is spent on these sort of procurement and vendor related discussions because it's become so fundamental to what enterprise AI is today.
So I think that opens a really poignant point of discussion. So if I were to simplify some of that for the audience, especially in the context of business. So a handful of companies have spent a lot of money taking a lot of data, questionable where it
Mm,
came from. So we won't name names or suggest where that data come from, but educated people can come to conclusions, even on a simplistic basis. If your business is in one particular sector, there could be a tiny portion of relevance in what a general model has trained.
mhm,
And there's two aspects. There's creating efficacy in its capability, and then there's specificity around the results directly related to the data that it was trained upon.
mm,
So it's something very general, which probably has data that, if you had visibility, would potentially not be relevant or potentially questionable. And people are looking to adopt that and either take something packaged as pre-influenced or API and potentially lose sovereignty. I mean, it's effectively, instead of you having your own glass of water, you can only access water via
mhm,
a hose,
mhm,
which goes to an undisclosed location where you
mhm,
don't really
mhm,
know what's happened. So what's the opposite to that, or what's the options, what's the potentials? And if we were to look at the concept, and I'm personally an advocate of it, control, edge, uh, private,
mhm,
looking at concepts real time, which come into play when effectively you focus probably proprietary information
mhm,
in a safe ring fence zone where you can take utility from capability from elsewhere, but you do it within your own environment, and then effectively you take the responsibility of training your own version. So you create
mhm,
your own intellectual property. I mean, this is where it kind of stems on. Are we talking about IP? Are we
mhm,
talking about
mhm,
security? Are
mhm,
we talking about authenticity? We're talking about guardrails. This is so baked in,
mhm,
where all of these aspects are different sides of uh, like a 50 pence piece.
mm. So it's really fascinating. There's a lot of different options for both organizations and companies and governments and countries as to how they want to play this. So you're absolutely right. The way you set it out is that a small number of companies have taken a huge amount of data and they've been able to build general purpose technology that the reason why it's been adopted so quickly, and we have these studies about ChatGPT potentially being the fastest adopted consumer technology app of all time, is precisely because it's general purpose. It can basically do a lot for most people, and so that's why it's been so successful in a sense in terms of user adoption. But that's also why a lot of organizations, they realize quite early on that there's significant limits to what they could do without significant customization of these models. And so there's a lot of different options there. But where most organizations have gone with this is not so much trying to build their own ChatGPT or build their own Gemini, because again, the costs can be very prohibitive from a compute perspective, but it's to actually what we call retrieval augmented generation, augment the general models, the general purpose models or the foundation models with their own data. So for most organizations, the data they have is their most, I guess, powerful and important asset, more
So
so than whatever model they could build. It's actually taking the general purpose model, but then optimizing the way it works by connecting it with their data that only they have access to, which
so
is like their moat.
graph rag.
Yeah, it's not like using knowledge graphs, using RAG applications, and potentially, if they can do what's called fine tuning. So that's when they retrain an existing model that has already been trained on new data so that it potentially works better for a specific use case. But a lot of these models can't be fine-tuned because fine-tuning requires a certain level of access to the model that not all the companies are willing to provide. So sometimes companies are fine-tuning models where they're actually training existing models on their data. But in many cases, they're connecting models that they don't have the ability to fine tune with their data so that when the model is performing what we call inference, which is essentially the model performing all of the calculations it needs to do to turn the input you provide into the best possible output, rather than just performing the calculations within the neural net that are based on the parameters that have been calculated during the training phase, it can also then retrieve information from, the RAG pipeline or the knowledge graph. And so that's what most organizations are doing. But then when it comes to governments, a lot of governments realize that, wait a minute, this doesn't work that well in our language, or it doesn't work that well for our culture. Most studies show that the kind of mainstream foundation models, they are, I guess, biased in a sense towards the English language and almost like a certain worldview that maybe is perhaps a more liberal worldview or a more educated worldview. So when you're talking to Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini, you're talking to a type of persona. Now, of course, you can instruct it to talk in different ways, but it's not able to represent what every culture or every person would be like. And a lot of countries around the world are building their own foundation models that are optimized for their language, their cultural and linguistic traditions, and their values. And I think that's an interesting one. I don't know if there are definitely some examples of some companies building their own kind of foundation model, but I don't think it's the norm across the enterprise world. Yeah.
But I think part of the future could just be the approach to model distillation.
Mm.
But I've had this chat with a number of educators, and might have been Professor Jim Collins or maybe one of them. I don't remember. But it's the mathematical view of how many people are currently on the market,
Mm-hmm.
the jobs market, with the capabilities, the expertise
Mm.
to solve particular problems. Now, look at 3 years ago, look at today, and look at in 3 years' time.
Mm-hmm.
So, pre generative AI wave, how many people are in university doing anything in and around Gen AI? Now, if you look how many are going into it,
Mm-hmm.
and like all market forces, what's the demand and what's the wages for certain types of skill sets? In 3 years' time and in 6 years' time, people will be
Mm-hmm.
coming out of university having done that, having taken the experience. So probably in 3 or 4 years' time, there will be, for every one person who was going into university to study this 3 years ago, there'll
Mm-hmm.
probably be 10,000.
Mm-hmm.
So that means the amount of expertise
Mm-hmm.
which enterprise level companies, organizations will have access to, the perpetual growth
Mm-hmm.
will probably look at taking a lot of these bigger models and having really intense model distillation
Mm-hmm.
to create incredible utility very specific
Yeah.
to that organization's point and purpose, which is probably, well, it isn't really there now,
Mm-hmm.
and in the current form that it most likely will be statistically
Mm-hmm.
in times to come.
It's not there now, but all of the foundations and the infrastructure required for that is there now. But it goes even deeper than that, I think, because I think where we're going with this is, and a lot of people are already operating in this way, it's not only about the organization having its own kind of optimized on-demand intelligence that's trained on its data, or that can at the very least draw from its unique data that only it has access to and that's been um, sort of developed by its own internal experts. Actually, every individual or can start to think like that. So what I advocate
Mm.
for a lot is the use of AI by the individual in an informed, intentional and independent way. So it's my kind of
Mm.
three eyes for intelligent AI use. Because I think one of the biggest risks we have is that if people use AI in a mindless way, or in just simple prompt, and it gives you the answer and that's it, then I don't think we're going to get anywhere. So I think that there's an opportunity here for people to think of AI as almost like an extension of their brain, but it requires a lot of work up front to actually give whatever your AI model or platform of choice is a huge amount of your own um, thoughts and data and past work and things that you've written and your own insights, and really detailed instructions so that the AI can actually be aligned with your values and your perspective and what you're trying to achieve. And then you can get to a place where you kind of almost like have a second brain, not to anthropomorphize AI, but you kind of have like a second brain where not only does the organization have kind of on demand, customized, bespoke AI, the individual can have that too. And I think that is quite exciting. For me, a lot of the work I do as a writer, as a researcher, as an educator, I am definitely a proponent and an advocate for using AI. I'm not a doomer. I'm not someone I'm not that says you shouldn't use AI. I think it's really important for AI governance professionals to actively use AI to understand what it is. But those three eyes are important, because intentional, what do you not do with AI? If I want to understand a law and I need to understand the law to do my job well, I won't rely on the AI summary of the law, because there's too high of a chance that there'll be an error or a hallucination, or that it will miss something important. So if I really need to understand the law or a regulation for my job, I will read it, or I would probably rather read articles written by lawyers summarizing it than an AI summary. So being intentional about when you use it and when you don't use it, being informed, I think a big part of that is understanding what the current capabilities are, and what AI can do. But equally important is understanding the limitations, because if you don't know what something can't do, you're not going to be able to figure out what are the best ways to use it. And I don't think it's anti-AI to talk about the limitations and risks of AI, because actually what I think it does is it's a key part of AI literacy. It helps people figure out where does it actually make sense to use it in a way that's valuable. So some of the limitations we've discussed, some others that maybe we haven't touched upon as much. Hallucinations. Hallucination is a really interesting concept, because it's not that it's wrong, it's that it sounds right. And that is something we haven't had with technology before. It's a confident, plausible sounding error that, if you didn't have expertise in a given topic, would be very hard for you to actually know. So hallucinations. And then the other big one is sycophancy. The model tends to be agreeable to your perspective for various reasons. It doesn't tend to want to tell you things that you don't want to hear. So taking all that into account, being informed, being intentional, and then finally being independent, not using AI as a replacement for your own thinking and all the other things you do in life that are crucial for your own work and your own kind of knowledge and research journey, whatever that is. Look at your use of AI as one small part of your broader sort of set of activities as a human that cares about the work you do and the knowledge that you're learning and that you're advancing.
It makes me think of one particular thing, and it probably
Hmm.
sounds a little crazy. Predator boots, right? So
Adidas? Yeah.
exactly, yeah. So I remember when they came out, and anyone on my little football team, one person got them, and you thought if you had Predator boots, you could curl a ball like David Beckham,
Hmm.
and you would suddenly become like David Beckham and
Hmm.
brilliant. Now, you could actually curl a ball, cross a ball a lot better,
Mm.
because it had utility. It had just a bit of bits on either side, so it
Mm-hmm.
gripped the ball better. But if you had them, psychologically, you thought you were better than probably were. I mean, if you're rubbish at football, a new pair of boots with a couple of
Mm-hmm.
bits on the side is not going to help a massive amount. But if you knew what you were doing, it could make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
But it was the psychology of it. And of course, you wouldn't have a pair of Adidas Predator boots to
Mm-hmm.
cook your dinner.
Mm-hmm.
That would just be a farcical idea. But if you looked at the utility, it could work. So that was one thing I was thinking. And maybe that's how people can look at AI a bit better and saying, well, what's the right tool for the job,
Yeah.
and what are the risks.
Or what's the right job for the tool?
Exactly, yeah. And the other thing is something Ben Legg,
Hmm.
who was the COO of Google
Hmm.
UK and Europe, really smart guy, and
Hmm.
he's talked about the socioeconomic and the different changes in an individual's life with relationship to work, and the idea of fractional living.
Hmm.
So the key differentiator for an individual is that human element, that expertise, the experience. It's
Hmm.
how you use your mind. It's your imagination. It's it's everything that you've built up throughout your life. It's the essence of the individual and how you think. You don't necessarily need to look at AI and say it's gonna take your job.
Hmm. Hmm.
If you look at for the opportunity where you could scale that value that you have as an individual and potentially find multiple opportunities
Hmm.
as part of what we've seen post pandemic, or definitely during the pandemic and post pandemic, a change in the work life structure, the
Hmm.
work life balance. And in many ways, can we decipher and differentiate the difference between what was an already evolving world,
Hmm.
the implementation of social media in our daily lives, even looking at film streaming, cinemas to film streaming? It's something we discussed with Aline van der Velde.
Hmm.
And I know from my own personal experiences as a filmmaker, the place you used to watch a film was a cinema. It was somewhere you'd get all your mates together, you'd go. There was a lot of films being made, and there was a lot of places to watch them. But we saw a change from that, and this is even pre-pandemic. So it's moved away from cinemas, and a lot of the cinemas don't exist anymore. We had streamers introduced, so we can look back and say, well, that's to blame. Go a bit further back, that's to blame.
Hmm.
Go a bit
Hmm.
further,
Hmm.
that's to blame. The statistics are there. We have seen a change in how humans behave, interact, and work. Now we've got AI, and everyone seems to have forgotten everything beforehand and saying it's all about this one thing now, and this is
Hmm.
changing everything. We're already changing and heading into a different trajectory anyway. And with every particular stage throughout modern human history, it's how we look at
Hmm.
things
Hmm.
and how we adapt and how we utilize something of benefit, because ultimately someone will.
Yeah, so there's really a lot of interesting points there I'd like to pick up on. So, a couple of data points first. The Pew Research Center in the US did a big study of how people in the US feel about AI, and they were asked to rank certain types of activities and say how positive or negative they would feel if they subsequently found out AI was involved. And the one that ranked top for I would feel really negative about this is if I found out that AI was used to write a politician's speech. So that was ranked as the area where the public would least want AI to be used. And to me, what that highlights is the premium of human authenticity. Another data point that I think can be used to make a similar argument is the word of the year last year was AI slop. And I think that was a visceral collective reaction to what is this nonsense? Like what about real art and creativity and the human expression that we value and cherish and that we've spent thousands of years kind of refining. So I do think that all those are two kind of random examples. I do think that in a way there will always be a bit of a backlash where the more AI becomes embedded in everything and part of everything, the greater premium will be placed on human authenticity and stuff that is really real and can only come from human work, human interaction, human values, human perspectives, and humans working and collaborating together to solve problems and achieve new insights. And then when it comes to, okay, what does that mean for me as a student or as an employee or a worker or an entrepreneur or a leader or as a parent? I think what that means is that in the next few years, one of the most important things is going to be how you respond to this technological revolution and how you actually use AI, because I think that's going to have quite a big impact as to whether your life goes in a positive or less positive direction. I do truly believe that. And I think what's really interesting is this kind of dissonance between the education world and the corporate world. In the corporate world, everything is AI first. Everyone has to use AI. We all need to upskill on AI as quickly as possible, which I'm not against. I think there's a huge amount of value in that because ultimately people should learn and should experiment and should adapt to new technologies. But the response from the education and academic world is no AI, don't use AI, and AI is bad. And I think that there's probably something in the middle that maybe makes more sense to me, which is use AI intentionally, but don't use it as a replacement for your own human creativity, your own judgment, your own reasoning. And paradoxically, there's going to be some people, or probably a lot of people, who just outsource their thinking and outsource their work to AI, who may feel like it benefits them in the short term because of how quickly they can churn things out. But I absolutely promise you the benefits in the long term will not be realized because of what you're missing out on. All of the best things in life come from hard work, come from struggle, come from grappling. We were discussing your films earlier in my book. It's really the journey of and the struggle of figuring things out yourself that leads to real progress. So I do think that the better option is to take what's best about kind of your human work and your human experience and use AI as a powerful augmenter of that. So some things that AI is really good at, obviously, is pattern recognition. So one thing I do as a writer is I provide my personal AI with my notes, my thoughts, my ideas, my past work, and see if there are themes or gaps or patterns that I may not have noticed. In that context, the hallucination doesn't matter as much because I'm not asking for it to be the absolute truth or to provide me with the absolute given truth on a topic, but it's definitely able to spot patterns that maybe I wouldn't have noticed, or I don't have time to read all of that myself. So that's like an example of what I'm getting at with, there are a multitude or an infinite number of ways you could choose to use this technology as an individual and as a society, and it's how you do it that's most important. But certainly just saying no AI or for schools to say don't use AI, it's not going to hold for very long as a policy. So I don't think that's the right approach.
Two aspects which I would convert my interpretation of what you just said there. Um, the idea that hallucinations are simply, in broken down in simple terms, statistical probability of the next word based upon the data that they had available. So the concept of right or wrong or anything else
Mm-hmm.
really doesn't exist because it's entirely interpretive.
Mm-hmm.
The second part, which I think leads into the first part, is the Dunning-Kruger effect, which I mentioned a load of times on this podcast. The idea from going, here's a question, here's an answer. If you don't take the journey in between, if there is no leverage upon experience, if there isn't adversity, some learning, if there isn't the room to fail and to find out why, it really goes back to a really simple thing. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Why is something right or wrong? Why is this the context in which we're operating? When you add that together, the Dunning-Kruger effect is people believing
Mm-hmm.
and they're becoming very passionate about
Mm-hmm.
how right they are,
Mm-hmm.
but they couldn't tell you why. And we're
Mm-hmm.
probably going to see a phase of people that have, as you said, accelerated very quickly
Mm-hmm.
up to the point they fall off the cliff
I
because
yeah,
because they have no
they
context.
reached the limit of yeah.
Yeah. And ultimately, if you don't know why, if you're not willing to appreciate these things, if you're not willing to do the work, and I don't think there is any such thing as a shortcut.
Mm-mm.
There is a decision and there's an implication, but there is no shortcut. I mean, we saw it with, I think one of the, James McQuivey from Forrester said on here, his frustration was CFOs immediately saying, right, we'll adopt AI. Where can we reduce headcount? That's the wrong rationale. And a lot of companies have been hiring people back because after a period of time, they've realized their output has gone down, their customer retention has gone down, You think, well, if you've taken out key parts and you've
Hmm.
replaced them with something on the basis of it's statistically probable for the next word, which is plausible in reality, as a customer or
Hmm.
a human being interacting, you're not looking for plausibility.
Mm.
You're looking for an outcome representative of the truth.
The AI models, they just process numbers basically. They don't. It's not about whether the model thinks something, as you said, it thinks something is true or not. There's no deeper understanding or grounding of the truth. It's about statistical relationships and patterns that have been observed in all of the data it's been trained on, and predicting what statistical pattern makes the most sense to reproduce every time it generates a new token, which could just be a word or a letter or whatever it may be. So there's absolutely nothing more going on than incredibly complex mathematical operations that are designed to accurately predict what permutation of words and letters and the way they're connected should come next. And I'll give you an interesting example that highlights the point. So there's a concept called jailbreaking, which is essentially in the kind of AI safety world, trying to get the AI model to provide you with information which it shouldn't. It could be something really, really serious or grave, like how to make a weapon or how to, do something really illegal, basically. And all of the models have guardrails to prevent that. A jailbreak would be, okay, how can we prompt the model in such a way as to bypass those guardrails and get it to give us information that we know it had because it was in the training data, but the guardrails have um, basically blocked it. And there was a paper last year that highlighted that a good way to do that is with poetry. So if you craft the prompts as poems, it's much easier to bypass the model guardrails because the model really can't compute the fact that a malicious instruction would be written as a poem, because poems are usually good things. They're usually in contexts that aren't malicious or aren't to do with weapons and attacks and all sorts of nefarious things. They're poems that people share for creative expression. So it was a really interesting example that highlights the point that AI doesn't understand the truth and reality. It's just processing numbers and statistical relationships between numbers, and the numbers are representing words. So it doesn't even process words; it processes tokenized words, basically numbers. And so the patterns that it saw in the poems, it didn't have any reason to think that there was anything untoward about those patterns because it was poetry. So a really interesting study that I think highlights the point. To the broader point about what all of this means for people, I think one thing that concerns me a bit is for younger people and for children in particular, because um, you and I and probably the majority, I would say, of people watching this podcast went to school and maybe even went to university without AI. They had to do the hard work that basically for hundreds and hundreds of years and for thousands of years, philosophers, mathematicians, scientists, they haven't had this technology that can sort of churn out intelligent looking outputs for them. So we've had no choice throughout our education and earlier professional life to do the hard work of figuring stuff out ourselves. The risk now is that for younger people, they may not see the value or the point of spending the time doing that if the AI can write the essay or solve the problem for them. And I can relate to that because I can't say that if I was in school today that I wouldn't be using AI to do my homework. And it would be kind of absurd for me to sit here and pontificate and say, oh, if I was 15 today, I wouldn't use ChatGPT to do my homework for me. So there's a huge task there for educational institutions to figure out what is the best way to educate people in a world in which take it as a given that they'll be using AI to do everything. And I think there's no going back from that. So that's why the education piece and what we're talking about, AI literacy, understanding its limitations, understanding what it can do really well, understanding what it shouldn't be substituted for, and actually educating young people on why it's inherently valuable to pursue research and knowledge and to talk to people in the real world and to read books and to do all of these things that will give you something that you can't get from an AI model, whilst also teaching people how to use AI in a really smart way. I just really believe that both of those facets are important. And I think that's coming from someone who spent many years doing one and is now quite passionately doing both together and actually seeing the improvements and the gains I'm getting from my own personal work, and the quality and quantity of what I'm able to do has accelerated massively through the use of AI, but it wouldn't have been possible without years of non-AI study and work.
Well, it really begs the question, surely there is a more evolved way of doing it. It puts into the question the idea that the data is in the function, the utility.
Mm.
Whereas if the utility has a tendency to be, the black box
Hmm.
idea, surely the data should remain or retain integrity. For example, the idea that you could disseminate everything down to its finest molecule,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
that you could reconstruct it from an atomic level up. The the description of data
Hmm.
retains um, accountability down to a final grain. That's one thing. If that's not the case, and let's say you do use a black box transformer methodology, surely there should be some form of validation and verification,
Hmm.
which is the home of the context of the outcome. So
Hmm.
in any business, again, I've said on this podcast a few times, if you use a subjective bank account
Hmm.
balance,
Hmm.
depending on how you ask the question, you might get a different bank balance when you go to, well, does anyone withdraw cash out of a cash machine anymore? I don't think so. A lot of people don't know what cash is anymore. But something where there is a fundamental business requirement,
Mm.
and in health,
Mhm.
well, the temperature is sort of this and the blood pressure is sort of that. Well, how do you ask different answer? We have to have subjectivity, that there has to be an observability in the real world,
Yeah.
right? Doesn't say that you can't have fantastic, scalable, incredible AI functionality and capability, but not just being so simplistic as saying, let's put it all in one box.
Mhm. Mhm.
The second view of that, and a common theme, is the value of the human,
Mhm.
where even if we're looking at a simple sense,
Mm.
social media, if the majority of things you look at you don't trust, you don't believe, you can't tell the difference, so you discount all of it and say the AI slop. Maybe it is true, maybe it's not true, maybe it is AI slop, maybe there's some genuine authentic stuff. But if you lose trust in the majority of what you see in the digital form, then the only thing that you can trust is the thing literally in front of you.
Mhm.
So the value of the human relationship, the value of conversation, the value of experience and knowledge from a trusted source
Mhm.
suddenly takes a very different direction to the value of people, which
Mhm.
in many ways AI could make the human experience fundamentally more enriched, valuable,
Mhm. Mhm.
and especially when the enterprise environment, to utilize the capability, like the engine and the um, times gone by, but to look at the value as the driver.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, I think it is really important, and I think we've mentioned this, but it's worth repeating that the current wave of mainstream AI models based on the transformer architecture that effectively are predicting the next token based on statistical patterns and statistical similarities observed in the training data is not the only AI approach out there, and it will evolve over time. Something else one day will replace it. Now, there's a lot of talk with the kind of AI elites and titans of industry about, well, what comes next? What comes after the large language model? Because we've got to a point now where more data and more compute is not going to fix some of the fundamental limitations. Now, of
Mm.
course, there are many techniques, and we spoke about some of them, such as retrieval augmented generation, connecting your model to your own data for grounding, or fine tuning where you retrain it to optimize it. None of those techniques completely solve the problem of the hallucination or of this kind of probabilistic, non-deterministic way in which these models work. So they're kind of architecturally, that's now built in. There's not going to be like a bulletproof way of preventing that with this type of model. So I think you're right that it's an interesting dynamic where it is, and it looks like it's going to continue to be the dominant way in which people access information and learn and work. But we have these fundamental flaws that none of the leading technologists in the world have an answer to. And the answer is, well, we'll have to figure out a new type of architecture to power these models that doesn't exist yet, that we hope that they'll figure out, I guess.
Mm.
So I don't think there's really a solution here, because the genie's out of the bottle. AI is at everyone's fingertips. And by the way, that's the main story of the past 3 years. Not the models, not the compute, not the energy, not the data. It's the way in which a technology that academics have been discussing since the 1950s is now democratized and at the fingertips of everyone with access to the internet and everyone with a connected device. And it's quickly becoming one of the dominant, and probably will become the dominant way in which information is accessed and consumed, and therefore how people work. But all of the leading technologists in the world tell us there's no bulletproof solution to some of these fundamental limitations. Hence, we're going to have to build a new type of model one day, but no one can really guarantee that that's going to work either. So I don't think there's a solution to it, but it's important for people to be aware of this. That's not to say that AI can't have hugely beneficial and positive impacts, but it comes down to, the themes of its discussion. It's how we use it, where we use it, and where we don't use it. And when we do use it, what type of AI are we actually using, and how are we optimizing its performance for a given domain?
That makes a lot of sense. So, what's your predictions for the future?
Well, always very foolish to engage in such predictions, but I'm going to do it anyway, just for the benefit of the audience. So really the big theme that we're seeing now in the AI world and in the enterprise AI world is what's called agentic AI. And so to make it really simple, agentic AI systems take action in virtual or real world environments. So we've been speaking a lot about generative AI and machine learning. Those AI techniques, essentially, they produce or generate an output, which is data or information that we consume or use. So, for example, with traditional machine learning, the AI model might give a prediction as to how likely you are to be committing benefits fraud. But then it would still be for the government department or the welfare agency to decide what to do with that prediction. Then we fast forward to generative AI. The output is the content. So the AI model produces a deepfake or a poem or a spreadsheet, but you still choose what to do with it, whether to do good with it or whether to do bad things with it or whether to do nothing with it. Then with agentic AI, the output of the AI model is the action. So the AI model, the same models that power generative AI systems like ChatGPT, they're now connected, or what's called sort of scaffolding. They're scaffolded to tools that they can use so that the model output can then direct a tool to execute an action. So it sounds complicated, but it's not. It's basically AI can now do things on your behalf on your computer. So rather than just generating text or images or videos for you to consume and choose what to do with, it can create a document, fill out the document, update documents, delete documents that could get dodgy. AI can delete data. It can use the internet. So what can you do on the internet? You can do anything on the internet. You can do amazing things and you can do terrible things. So we're in a world now, the beginning of this wave of agentic AI systems, where purely through natural language prompting, the same kind of way in which we use ChatGPT, people now have access to tools that can actually take actions on their behalf. And I think what's really interesting there is that as AI becomes more autonomous, the incentive for enterprises to adopt it will become greater, because there'll be more economic incentives and more potential for speed and efficiency and optimization. but the risks will become greater too, because the fundamental limitations of AI that we've been talking about haven't actually been solved, but the capabilities have been enhanced by giving the AI models ability to take action. That action could be sending an email, it could be deleting a huge amount of data that's critical to your organization, it could be exfiltrating. Basically, what that means is the AI could send data out that that it shouldn't. So there's all sorts of things going on here, but I think the closing point I'd want to end on is, with agentic AI and increasingly autonomous AI systems, it's so important. All the stuff we've been talking about, AI literacy, AI understanding, is so important for people that are using AI in their career, in their work, in their studies, and for the leaders of the organizations and educational institutions people work in, to really take time to understand, what can this technology do well? What can it maybe not do so well? What are the biggest opportunities? What are the biggest risks? What are the biggest limitations? So that, as I said earlier, your use of AI can be informed, intentional, and independent. So no matter how autonomous AI systems become, I would really say that we should never use AI to outsource our thinking in a way that could disempower us as humans in the long term, because I just don't think anyone will really benefit from that.
Well, just to add to that, because disempower, I completely agree with that. And the reverse of that, empowering people, and something we've generally talked about it as using AI for good. But our little two pennies worth on the agentic element, the idea of taking subject matter expertise, which is probably expensive, economically not viable to
Mm,
employ another 30, 40, 50 subject matter experts. So it's additive, it's not replacing, but it's empowering, and it's still to serve the decision maker, but to do so on scale in a much more powerful way. I think there's an element of agentic coming,
mhm,
which it's how it's designed, it's the infrastructure in which it's built. It's
mm,
actually leveraging the expertise of people that have worked in large organizations for at least the last decade,
mhm,
building systems, ensuring security of systems, a collaborative team effort to create utility and capability which simply did not exist
mhm.
before. And when it's framed in that manner, the potential is fantastic, and the excitement and the opportunity is huge. But that does mean the type of the things you talk about,
Mm.
the expertise you have with governance, understanding risk, the education of it is absolutely critical and fundamental.
I fully agree. I mean, if you look at what like a pharmaceutical organization like AstraZeneca, we have thousands and thousands of incredible scientists working across oncology and biopharma, and really figuring out how to advance treatments in all sorts of areas. I think there's huge potential benefits if they can all be empowered with thousands of AI agents that are also trained on all of that domain specific data to help them work faster, work smarter. So I think the opportunities are tremendous, but there's a lot to navigate on that journey.
So finally, and most importantly, tell me about your book.
Well, so my book, it's called Fundamentals of AI Governance. And hopefully, as you can tell, I've been thinking about this set of issues for quite a long time now. So it's been quite a cathartic process of writing this book. But Fundamentals of AI Governance is going to be released in September this year, so September 2026. And it essentially provides the operating manual for organizations with respect to how they can manage the risks of AI, navigate and comply with global regulations in markets like the EU, the US, and China, and ultimately implement, scale, and maintain an AI governance framework that enables them to maximize the value of AI whilst minimizing the risk. So it's a business practitioner focused guide to AI governance that will cover a lot of the themes that we've been discussing today, plus a lot more. And I'm really excited to be publishing it and sharing it with the world.
Excellent. And in the meantime, where can people find out more about you?
So I'm fairly active on LinkedIn, just search Oliver Patel and you should be able to find me there. I've also got a newsletter, which is called Enterprise AI Governance on Substack. So put the links in the description. But I do share quite a lot of content and thinking across these topics online. And I'm taking a bit of a build in public approach. So I've essentially, on the journey of writing the book, I've been publishing lots of my ideas, lots of my articles online, basically to help me with the writing process and to get the feedback from the community. So I'm looking forward to exchanging with people there.
Excellent. Well, Oliver, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks so
Thank you.
much.